Yeah, I'm on it.
So there's a.
That's perfect for what that's exactly.
Yeah, that's a. So that's just.
Seems like a good idea.
Just.
Perfect. See, it worked.
Still at more. So.
Is the flip chart for us?
I'm sorry?
Are we planning on using that flip chart?
No, we're not. We're gonna get rid of that.
You guys hiding a trick?
I don't know where that came from.
Got it? Not nearly as much.
All right. Which one are you trying to connect to?
I'm going to be true. I know IETF from time I didn't.
No, probably regular IETF. The one I'm on. It's just IETF, all lowercase. It's very secure. Yeah.
Here you go.
Hmm?
If anyone else in the solution.
More people would need that.
That's why I didn't.
It's also, that's a thing which is, a topic which is more interesting to the open source community than the rest of the IETF.
You're expecting the losses.
Let's get done.
Unfortunately for a number of our participants, this is like 3:30 in the morning.
Yes.
2:30 Eastern.
But that's true of everywhere, isn't it?
True of everywhere.
Everywhere we go, we have a substantial number of participants, it's 3:30 in the morning.
Right. But I just know that, yeah, people will be contributing.
I wonder if they could have that as one of the options on the schedule, you know. Rob participants on time zone. on the scheduling request form.
Well, I thought the reason we Cellar usually met in Europe is because we're somebody.
Yes, there are a number of participants in Europe, but there are also some on the East Coast of the U.S.
So you can't win.
Yeah.
So,
Who are we waiting for?
You already have a JavaScript?
Yeah, we do not have a JavaScribe.
I'll volunteer for that, so I don't have to take notes.
All right. Mo had already volunteered to take notes, but then didn't show up.
Are you expecting them?
We were kind of, yes. Otherwise, we'll have to volunteer someone else.
I did the notes for an FBC, but maybe they were terrible. So.
What happened? Looking at my general roster, the remarkable number of people that are online. Must have been a discussion.
I have a question. Question, Mike, so this is Mike.
Right, that's
Yeah. No, one of the members, one of the people off this was, says it has to be in queue.
Oh, he wants to testify.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, means we get to push the big red button.
All right.
Hello.
All right.
Sounds good.
Do I look?
Here you go.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm not sure we can see you.
There you are, yes.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Okay, that's all. I just wanted to make sure that you could see and or hear me.
No problem. Thank you.
And all of me there, participants see the person.
Now, how do I leave the queue?
It wasn't me.
Relinquish control.
Yeah.
We do it on this end.
Oh, I like the red button. Makes me feel powerful.
All right, maybe we should find an alternate note taker.
All right. So, yeah, before we get started, anybody like to volunteer to take notes? There are about 4 people.
Well, so we probably shouldn't volunteer our AD. We probably shouldn't volunteer our presenter. We probably shouldn't volunteer our JavaScribe, who specifically volunteered to JavaScribe so we didn't have to take notes. That only leaves us 2 people.
We shouldn't volunteer our chairs, right?
I think you're referring to 2 people who don't follow this group at all and are sitting here looking to just do this.
Yep, exactly.
I've done that before.
I'm new here, I don't know what's going on.
Oh, I'll wait.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm going to expect you to summarize, I'm going to take a report this.
So please be explicit with action items and to the
Yes, for people who are remote and didn't hear the people in the room not speaking into microphones, if you would like something specifically recorded in the minutes, please make sure to note it explicitly.
And Jimmy asks if you have the slides for his presentation.
Yes.
Wait.
You're off the hook, Dan.
Does Mo know he's taking this?
Very much.
That was an extra.
Thanks a lot, Mom.
So, all right, can everyone hear me? Is this a reasonable volume? Okay, great. So thank you everybody for coming. This is the second in-person meeting of Codec Encoding for Lossless Archiving and Real-Time Transmission, aka Cellar. Before we get started, does anybody need us to read the note well or to go over the note well? Okay, well, I'll read it for my own edification. Any submission to the IETF intended by a contributor for publication as all or part of an IETF internal draft or RFC, and any statement made within the context of an IETF activity is considered an IETF contribution. Such statements include oral statements in IETF sessions, as well as written and electronic communications made at any time or place which are addressed to. And then you have the list of those places to which communications can be addressed. So if there aren't any further questions about the note well, we can just go on to a brief introduction. I suppose I should introduce myself. I'm Tessa Fallon. I'm co-chair of Cellar, and
I'm Tim Terryberry.
I'm sorry?
And together we are well, so.
Excellent.
So we already have our Jabber scribe and our note taker. So if you do have a question or a comment and you're in the room, please remember to use the microphones that are placed in the center of the aisle and to clearly articulate your question as well as your name. That will help people who are attending remotely and as well as our note takers and the recording. Okay, so are there any changes to the agenda or any proposed changes to the agenda at this point? Okay, so the agenda has not changed from when we first made it available online. So if we can move past that, we'll go on to the milestones. We have a number of milestones that were planned for 2017. So I think after we get an update on the status of each of the proposed standards, we can go into more of a discussion about those and about which milestones I guess you can't really sort of meet a milestone. You either do or you don't, right? But I know we're on track for several of them, and so I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we know what the next steps are in terms of getting the documents to their appropriate tracks. I think in terms of the FFV1 video codec versions 0 to 3, we have the informational draft approved by the working group. So I think I don't know that we send out a formal announcement or if it's appropriate to send out a formal announcement for meeting a milestone or.
Well, we will go through the formal publication process, but yeah. So
Okay.
The milestone will be closed when the document is actually published.
Okay. Great. So we had it approved by the working group.
Also, when you update a milestone in the data tracker, it sends email to the mailing list automatically. So
Okay.
when you've actually met it, update the data tracker, and
Mhm.
people will get announcements of it.
this has been technically your milestones are written as is smart to do in terms of sending to the ISG, not publication. Your milestone is done when you public it.
That seems better.
Okay.
After that, it's a problem.
And I assume that doesn't mean it's over. That means
Right.
that milestone is done. I assume that shortly after this, we will come up with dates that are in the future.
Yes.
Technically, you're still.
There's a little bit of July left,
Yeah.
but I don't expect a lot of work out of people next week. At least the people that are flying back from Prague.
Right, but I mean, I've only included the milestones up through July. There's 2 additional milestones, I think December for 2017 for FLAC, and then September 2017, I think, for the next version of Matroska. And then on the next slide, just a screenshot of the current document states and the comments as they exist. And the 2 FFV1 documents are there because there was an issue with updating a version. And instead of updating the existing version, we got 2 versions. So I've been meaning to look into that, and I shall. Okay, so that is it from me. Unless you have anything to add, Tim.
Nope, nothing for me.
Okay. We'll go to our first presenter, Jerome Martinez.
Okay, so Jérôme Martinez, I will inform you about the status of FFV1 specifications. First, during the last year, we checked the difference between the spec and the reference decoder. The reference encoder and decoder are FFmpeg for the moment. And in the reference encoder, there are some known bugs, for example, some integer overflows or some difficulties with color mapping. So both the encoder and the decoder have the bugs, and it is impossible to do the difference between buggy files and a file not buggy, because this is only most issues are about colors. So the streams is valid in all cases, but the colors are a bit wrong. So as it is a bit challenging to change now the reference encoder and decoder, and the files are already in the wild, so we put documentation of the exception in the specification instead of changing the reference encoder and decoder. So now the specification contains the expected format plus some exceptions for the documentation of the bugs in the reference encoder and decoder. So the spec and encoder are in sync.
This has been, so refresh my memory because I've been to a lot of things this week. This is one of the milestones, which is documenting reality as opposed to building something new. Is that correct?
Right. So there's a milestone for versions up through 3, which are documenting reality, and then there's a separate milestone for the next edition.
And so when you're talking about the files in the wild, we're talking about the documenting reality part, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's exactly right. I mean, if there's bugs in that, then we just mention that in the documentation is perfect.
Clear, FFV1 version 0, 1, and 3 are files in the wild, so it is difficult to change them. And
we shouldn't try.
And we shouldn't try, right? So the specification was not containing the exception, so we added the exception instead of changing the files in the wild. And for version 4, we will fix that.
Okay, so when you say the next version of the format, you mean next version of the format, not next version of the draft for versions 1
No,
2,
no. The next version of the format, we will change. We will fix the bugs in the encoder and decoder, maybe. And we will decide. It will be a discussion in the mailing list. We can keep them as is, or we can fix that in the next version in order to have something more coherent in the format. But for the moment, version 0, 1, and 3 files are in the wild. We don't change them. We only document them.
You're better off. Give me senses. There's not some slides on the.
Okay.
We've been having some lag between the time you put them there and the time they show up in the no, in the, cluster. I think we probably get through the videos correctly.
Well, you guys, I totally end anyway, just wanted to make sure that you're.
Yeah, we do have copies of this.
Okay.
Additionally, we made a review of the specification with some cleanup. Sometimes we were not using the exact same wording for the same thing, so we use now everywhere the same name for the same thing. And we changed some formatting about formulas in order to be more compatible with RFC output. And we also, during the reviews, saw that there is some issues. The specification was not exactly was in the reference encoder decoder, but in that case, we can fix the specification. If, for example, there was an unsigned in the decoder and the spec was saying signed, it was a typo. So we fix that in the specification without breaking the files in the while. We also added more description in the specification in order to be very explicit about the meaning of each item. When it was not very clear, we reworded some sections. So now we expect that every item in the specification is clear and correctly described. We added a mapping for Matroska for the historical part. FFV1 in Matroska was using the AVI compatibility layer of Matroska, and we don't want to use a compatibility layer from Microsoft, for example. And we want to have a direct mapping between FFV1 and Matroska without using any compatibility layer. This compatibility, this codec ID is added in FFmpeg, but not by default about writing. So reading is okay, but for writing we want during some times to be compatible with the older version of FFmpeg, not supporting the native FFV1 codec ID. So we don't write by default this new codec ID in FFmpeg. Still, the goal is always to have some compatibility with the files in the wild and not create issues for the decoding, because we can still use old FFmpeg versions with that. But it is ready for the future, and we have a native codec ID.
So Tim Terryberry from the floor. Is this something that we want to specify in this document, or does this more properly belong in one of the Matroska documents?
For the moment, we defined if FFV1 document all the mapping between FFV1 and AVI, FFV1 and MOV, FFV1 and Matroska. It may be in FFV1 document, it may be in Matroska document, it may be a single document. This is to be decided. For the moment, the three non-mapping, MOV, AVI, and Matroska, are in FFV1 document. It could be decided to extract that. It is only a paragraph, so to be decided. For the moment, it is inside the FFV1 document. Is it something we should remove and put somewhere else?
Right. So I have no idea what the answer to that question is, but maybe some of our people who work on the Matroska document have an opinion. So I don't know if any of the remote participants or anyone else in the room has strong opinions.
Steve is doing the queue, so I'm going to press the red button and.
Green button.
All right. Hi, Steve.
Must be muted on his end. We don't have to check.
No, Steve, we can't hear you.
Steve, are you muted?
No, we can't hear.
Steve? Steve, we don't hear you.
Um,
He says, let me try with my tablet.
okay. Let's just give this 1 minute.
Since he's one of our presenters, it seems important to have this work.
Charlie, can you flood that?
Well, why don't we move on while he's trying to get his AV set up?
Anybody else have any comments?
So, continue?
Yeah.
Next slide.
We did it. Any decision on what to put it? No. Move it or don't move it? What decision?
Well, let's see if Steve has a comment when he gets his thing working.
Okay, from my point of view, there is only one missing part now in
Sorry.
Steve. We try again with Steve.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I was just saying there's actually a part about the codec mapping in the Matroska presentation. We are planning to do a separate document with all the codec mappings that are known and need to be documented. I assume other codecs in the future might add their own mapping, and it will probably not go in the Matroska documentation and in their own documentation. So I think it makes sense that a codec, even if it's documented in Matroska, has its own mapping definition. We just need to make sure it doesn't collide and have issues, incompatibilities with them. Maybe when the FFV1 is done, if it's done before the Matroska 1, it can be merged into the Matroska 1. Or if we know already there's going to be one well-defined for FFV1, we might just put in the Matroska documentation for FFV1 and refer to that document and not to this one.
John, thanks. I mean, I think we want to be, we don't want to have more than one place that normatively defines how something works. We want to
Yes, so
be definitive about this.
in my opinion, it's better that codecs do their own mapping because they know better their codec, and people using that codec will actually want to know the mapping when they use it. So, and plus, we're not going to update or make an obsolete Matroska document just for adding one codec because there's so many. So in my opinion, it's better to have codecs do their own. We're going to have one for well-known codecs that are actually in the wild and need to have a known mapping documented, and will unlikely have a document from official other standard bodies. So that's why we need that document. Otherwise, Matroska is not really usable. But I think for the case of FFV1, where Matroska will be documented, it's better to have it in that document.
I suggest that in the Matroska codec mapping, we add a line about FFV1 saying that the FFV1 mapping is defined in the FFV1 spec. So we don't write again the same thing, and we link and we say that where is the mapping.
Yes.
All right,
It's
you get
fine.
that for the notes, Will?
So the Nebraska spec will point to the FFV1 spec.
Exactly. Yes. In my opinion.
All right, thank you.
So about the specification of FFV1, we described the complete bit stream up to the pixel for unique pixel decoding per pixel. And about the decoding of the pixel, we have already a lot described in plain English. And we have the algorithm described, we have how it is built, how the encoding was built, but we don't have it yet in CLAC description. So in my opinion, it would be good to have an additional paragraph about a CLAC description of the pixel decoding. And from my point of view, it is only the only missing part.
Jonathan, there's just a question here. I mean, if you have both the C and the English, are you defining one as normative, the other as informative? Because obviously, anytime you have two descriptions of something, they can disagree. So which one is going to be canonical?
I think, in my opinion, the C-like description will be the reference, and the English text will be the informative part, but it is to be decided on the mailing list. But yes, we need to make it explicit what is informative and what is the specification. Okay. The current implementation of FFV1 are FFmpeg, which is currently the reference encoder decoder. libav has its own encoder decoder, but be careful, it is a fork. As it is a fork of FFmpeg, it contains the same bugs as FFmpeg. And we have another decoder in MediaInfo based on the specification, and it is a completely different implementation. We have some requests about FFV1 version 4, so with a new and without any files in the wild. And we should add, we should support more pixel formats and add some more native metadata. For example, there is no color description, transfer characteristics, and so on. We need to, currently we rely on the container, for example, Matroska, but it will be good that FFV1 can transport its own metadata. And we may add some optimization of the algorithm for FFV1 v4. And all of this need to be discussed on the mailing list. For the moment, we standardize FFV1 0, 1, and 3 files on the wild, and after that, or in parallel, we need to define v4 with missing pixel formats. So, do you have some questions?
Jonathan, I was wondering what you meant by optimization of the algorithm. Would it actually be changing the bits in the file, or just this?
Maybe there is some possibility to have a better compression with some teeny change in the algorithm.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, if you just meant like optimize the the implementations, that wouldn't need to be done.
No, this is not optimization of encoder. This is optimization and having some optimization in the encoder, but we need to change the bit stream.
Okay,
maybe I said.
All right, so I have a question. How many people have read this draft?
One.
More people don't have.
There is Dave Rice read it. He's sleeping for the moment. And me, Michael Niedermeyer wrote the initial spec, so at least 3, and after that,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another issue. It's worth discussing. You know,
Reto Commerce is.
Weto, yes, 2. Weto Comer.
No, I mean, we certainly need, you know, in the group, more people. You know, so this is something that would benefit from discussion perhaps later on in the meeting, that I think for the documents that do exist, we definitely need more reviewers, I think, looking at these, because I know there are discussion threads that have kind of come to a standstill where, you know, it's a worthwhile and interesting discussion, but a consensus isn't reached on the mailing list. And, you know, I think, you know, in a case, it's, you know, one possibly a matter of people having tons of work to do and being overwhelmed and, you know, and everything like that. But, you know, I don't know what the answer to that, but.
John says she's spread them, but as an academic, not an engineer.
That's good too.
Despite the name of the standards group, we don't discriminate.
This has been nature of this document. It's going to be pulling teeth to get lots of reviews. There's 2 things you can do. One is peg volunteers by name. So, you know, get people who haven't read it, ask if they will actually, you know, put their name forward, is that they will review this within a certain time period. And sometimes it's not the way it's intended to be done, but sometimes we find that working group last calls will flush out some reviews that you might not have gotten otherwise.
And this is like, when you say sorry, when you say you know, volunteers for review, this is something different than like the formal review process, right? This is just
To read the draft and make comments.
right.
We're not formal about much anything.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I guess when you say the formal review process, you're talking about IETF last call and the IESG reviews. No, yeah, I'm talking about different than that, which is part of IETF last call.
All right. Are there any other questions for Jerome? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Steve? Next, Steve, are you there?
Make sure you're close to the drink.
Hello, well, again. So next topic is Matroska. So it's a video container. I don't know if, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Next, switch to the next slide.
Yeah, it may be helpful if you explicitly say that.
Okay.
So I don't.
Yes. So it started I think the date is wrong. It's not 2012, but 2002. So about 15 years ago, to do, well, my goal was to do live TV captures with the hardware that was available at this time. So was not very good with the existing containers when you have lost frames and stuff like that. So I worked on a project that already existed to do that, which was called MCF, and then it was formed because we had differences on how to do things, especially about EBML. So the idea was to have something what the technologies borrowed from stuff that exists in AVI, in OG. The EBML is inspired from XML, and all the idea that the semantic can do a lot for you compared to storing everything in the file also come from the semantic web that was emerging at the time. So now the major use of Matroska is with H.264 and H.265. You can find that in basically any player now. Any TV that's out that's a smart TV can play Matroska with this codecs. Windows 10 has built-in support now. Blu-ray players have had that for many years as well. All the open source players can play that. Plus VP8, VP9, that's mostly from Google and YouTube, but it's also used, I think, by Netflix. It's used by Nintendo, I think, as well. All in Matroska as well. And for audio, you have AC3, that's very common, DTS, obviously ASE, Opus, which was added recently with some changes or additions needed in the format. It's used so by Google with YouTube, but Mozilla, which supported WebM from the very beginning. So WebM is basically Matroska with some features removed and using VP8 and VP9 as a codec and Vorbis or Opus as audio. And recent additions that have been added to Matroska during the standardization process is 360 videos, which it's not supported by Google because they use their own thing on YouTube, on JavaScript, but I think they have it in the WebM spec anyway, and the HDR metadata, which also is available in WebM. So I think you can switch to the next slide.
Before the next slide, yeah, we have a question from the floor.
Mozinati, yeah, I have a question about WebM. There seems to be a pretty large usage of Matroska, probably I would guess the dominant usage of Matroska outside of maybe, unsavory activities.
Personal video.
So what is the plan for documenting WebM? Will it ever be part of this specification, or it'll always be something separate? And how will they evolve together over time? Because that seems to me like a pretty confusing management problem.
Yes, so WebM is basically, if you look at the WebM specifications on the WebM website, it's basically the Matroska specification from our website, but with elements removed. It uses the same formatting. Most of the text is the same. It's really the same specifications. And WebM doesn't have anything that's not in Matroska, and everything that's defined in Matroska applies to WebM. So basically, what we're doing will also include WebM. We actually, in each element that we define in the specification, we tell if it's supported by WebM or not. But then if it's supported by WebM, there's no difference than how it applies to Matroska. It's really the same format.
Okay, it just seems a little strange that, IETF would have a document that goes through all the normative parts of Matroska, but then the dominant use of it, there's not a IETF document for the normative use of it.
I wish Google will help us work on this specification as well. Some of Google people, and Mozilla as well, are in the mailing list and helping a little, but not really working on the documentation. But that's also because WebM is just a subset of Matroska, so there's really no difference.
It couldn't just be moved to an appendix
goes further and add more stuff that's not relevant to web usage, or at least they think. I've always thought that almost anything that's in Matroska should be in WebM. And little by little, actually, when WebM started, they only had a very small subset of what's in Matroska, and little by little, they added stuff they already that was already in Matroska because they realized they actually need it. So maybe as time goes by, they will add more and more stuff in WebM that's already in Matroska.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem is it makes it even more confusing rather than helpful because then you have, you know, two different version numbers and no change control over which
Yes.
which one's really authoritative or not.
Actually, we could see if we can make a separate documentation for WebM that says, but basically that's already in the WebM website. They tell you we use this and that element from Matroska plus these ones. For example, encryption, they have better specifications for encryption that we might take from there. But yeah, basically that's how WebM worked so far without, I think for them, their website is the official specification and it's based on the Matroska specification.
So have we talked to anyone from Google to ask them what their opinion is on this issue?
Not the WebM team in particular. There's likely 2 or 3 people from Google that from time to time talk on the Cellar mailing list, but not specifically about WebM.
Jérôme Martinez. In this working group, we are mostly working on Matroska because we have no power on WebM, and in that case, we can only do something informative in the specification about WebM, saying which item from Matroska is used in WebM. If we can, the contact we have with Google is not very often, and they can decide unilaterally to add some item. We try to follow WebM and not to be incompatible with WebM, but we cannot say it will be compatible forever because we have no power on that. So it is only informative. And Matroska is what we are working on.
Now, it sounds like maybe it's worthwhile at least talking to them to see what their opinion is. They might be interested in having a more formal venue to standardize their subset of Matroska anyway. So I don't know if that's appropriate for this working group or not, but it seems harmless to at least get their opinion.
Yeah, I agree. So on this next slide, it's mostly about where you can find what's being done right now, so the mailing list. Then there's 2 GitHub repositories, one for EBML, which is the underlying binary format for Matroska, which can be used for other things than Matroska, and the specification is done that way. It's not tied to Matroska at all. And one is more for Matroska stuff. There's one main document for right now that specifies all the Matroska things. It's so on both repositories, the specifications are written in Markdown format. And then it generates an XML file that generates the IETF documents. Anyone can do that on their computer. And there's also in the Matroska repositories, the website, like a shadow version of the website. That's the official specification for now, is also generated, but we might remove that because like right now, the IETF documents take too much from the website in an informal way. And we want to clean that up, so we're probably going to drop that. And there's also an XML file that's defined in the Matroska documentation that defines all the elements, EBML elements found in the format with the documentation, and that file is actually used to generate a big part of the documentation for Matroska. That's also used to generate code in the at least 2 libraries, maybe more. We try to encourage people because that would be probably the formative document for how you interpret Matroska. This way we don't have, even the text in the documentation has to match that document. And like I said, there's also a field for each element that tells is it in WebM or is it not in WebM. That's as the current WebM specifications are, because like we said, they can add elements at any time. When they add new things, I think they did it in the past, they tell us, oh, we added that, you might want to add it to the Matroska, and we do it. We wish it would be more open, because sometimes they define things their own way, and when we look at it, we say, oh, but we would have done it a bit different, but now it's too late because it's in WebM. So, but like we said, we don't have any control over that, even though we work together. It's usually in one way. So that's that. I don't know if you have questions, or we can go to the next slide.
I have a question. So if the set of elements that are included in WebM is expected to change more frequently than the Matroska specification itself, perhaps that's something that shouldn't be in the RFC, but could be maybe added in an IANA registry or something like that we could update more easily.
Yes, maybe right now it's a flag on each element that tells if it's WebM or not. We could think of a way to have a separate document that says, yeah, basically which element is in WebM. Yeah, I guess we can do that. For now, it was also done that way because it was used to generate the website in matroska.org. That has a table with all the elements, and if it's supporting version 1, 2, 3, then in DivX, because DivX also has extensions to Matroska, they have their own, not their own Matroska, but they use Matroska as well, and also WebM. So we had a table that's easy to read when you want to know why it's supported, but probably, yeah, for the IETF document, we don't need that at all. So yeah, we could drop that as well. So the milestones, we already discussed that. So there's the current one in April and July. So in April, we published the new documents for EBML. This document is actually quite good, or it's in good shape. It's understandable and covers most of the stuff we want. Then in July, we published Matroska v3 specification. The documents probably still need a bit of work. Like I said, it's borrowing too much from an informal website, and we want to clean that up. And the plan is to have in September Matroska v4. V3 is basically files that are in the wild for 10 years maybe. V4 is more stuff that has been added recently, and we'll talk about later. Maybe there will be a V5 with all the recent additions and things that might be needed to add in future Matroska. Next. So the document for EBML is close to final, in my opinion. If you have the same question you asked to Jérôme, I have no idea how many people read it. Probably the same as for FFV1, at least some people from Google and Mozilla as well. I know that. I don't know how many people. So in the GitHub repositories, which We try to also match with whatever is discussed on the Cellar mailing list. There's currently 0 pull requests. Everything that's been proposed has been merged. There's currently 4 issues, so 2 text clarifications on how and what to do with junk data or invalid data, how it's supposed to be interpreted. We have to clarify that. There's also a proposal to have version 0 for an EBL document. That would mean it's not in usable state. If it's version 0, you cannot expect the semantic to be stable. So that's something we probably want to add in the EBML definition. And one is to add, maybe in that document, maybe in an extra document, how to define an EBML, like EBML data, but in a readable form. So probably something that resembles XML. So I don't know if it could be that document or another. And the other thing I would like to do before calling it really final is to have a lot of people read it and make sure we understand it's understandable by most people. Because for us who have been working on it for so long, everything makes sense, but for a newcomer, I don't know. So
Ben Campbell, adding XEBML seems like a substantial scope increase. And so I would suggest the working group think very hard if they want about whether they want to add that bit of scope to this working group, at least right now. The other comment I had actually is I've actually scanned this one. Now I see scan is like, scan is the operative word. And I think one thing that probably should be clarified in it, probably in the abstract introduction, is why we're doing this. Because when we take yet another file format document, data format document to the IETF last call and the IESG, there's going to be a whole lot of why. And the fact that this is a dependency for Matryoshka and such is an important thing to make sure people understand.
Okay.
So now
that should only take a sentence or two.
Now there are 5 open issues.
I wouldn't call that an open issue. It's more of a warning.
No, we're in the GitHub. I try to classify all the issues because in Matryoshka you'll see there's a lot, and that's one of the categories actually clarifications, and that would be one of them. Like, why do we have EBML? How was it created in the first place? So yeah, and why is it needed to have a standard as well? So that
right, and
that would be a category issue for me, but it's just the way we
put a little finer point on my comment. Getting the IETF to accept yet another general purpose data encoding format will be hard. Getting them to accept one that we are publishing for a very specific purpose is considerably easier.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, because for a long time, I hope that EBML will be widely used for a lot of things, and it didn't turn out that way. But yeah, if we propose something that's actually a general purpose format, either we want to have a lot of people make sure it's correct and a lot of people use it, or say, well, it's defined for that scope. You may use it for something else, but basically it's really for Matryoshka and derivative.
Jonathan Lennox, in your introduction, you mentioned various other communities, / matters who are using Matryoshka. And you mentioned Nintendo, and I think somebody else. Has any attempt been made to reach out to those people to see what they think about this standardization?
Well, for example, Nintendo is because they actually use WebM, so they actually use Matryoshka things. that was a few years ago. I don't know if they switched to something else now, but at the time, for example, anything that was coming from YouTube was not in H.264, but only in WebM, on Nintendo. But that's it. On DivX, it's different because, but that was like, 10 years ago, I think. They decided they needed their own file format and they went with Matroska and added a few extensions that they have documented. But I don't even know if DivX still exists anymore or if they actually do maintain their own format or they switch to something else. I really have no idea. And I don't know who to contact there.
Yeah, so to go back to the EBML document, are there any people who are willing to step up and put out their name as someone who will review this document? So I'll go ahead and start, but I'm one of the working group chairs, so I probably have to do it. But I've looked at this once before and had a bunch of comments, and so I'll take a look at it again. But anyone else in the working group? All right, Jerome has put forth his name.
Or if there were, I guess.
I mean, you could probably, you know, honestly,
I guess we could also give send out a request on the mailing list as well. Sorry. So I think we should also send out a request on the mailing list as well to get people to, to pin down people to commit to reviewing the BML document. So in case anybody who's participating remotely needs some time to think about it before throwing their hat in the ring, yeah, we can do that as well. But okay, that's all I have to say.
All right, well, thank you, Jerome.
I think are we done with Metroscope? Sorry.
No, there's at least one more slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, 2 or 3, which is where we got with Matroska. So as a video multimedia file format, it's actually a huge task to standardize because there's currently 243 EBML elements. So that's in XML, that would be a tag name. So there's 243. 33 of them are marked as deprecated, but we still need to document that for old files. A lot of elements depend on the other, at least their parent, but also sometimes there are interactions between parts of the file. So that's also tricky to document. You cannot just define that element means that. Sometimes it in reference to something else. So in terms of what's currently in the pipeline, so there's 7 pending pull requests on the GitHub, so 3 text clarifications, most of them on chapters. There's one on codec mapping and one on fonts. Basically, be more precise on how to use these. There's 3 codec definitions, which are currently in the main document. So every codec that we know has a codec mapping with the name and how to interpret the data in the codec private and in the blocks. There's one pull request with text formatting. And then the issues, so it's a moving target. I cleaned a lot recently, but we keep adding more. So as last night, I think there's 22 issues. So 8 are text clarifications. So basically the formative text, which needs to be improved. So it tells on which parts and why. Format additions, it's for ideas that people have for future things in Matroska compared to what exists now, things to add. So that would be something like V4 or V5 version of Matroska, 3 text formatting, and 5 codec definitions, which needs some work. There's probably more, but that's what people review the documents saw. I think we can go on the next slide because it's more refinement of what I just said. Actually, no, okay. So I don't know, maybe you can go back and if people have questions on these.
Yeah, so how many of these issues are something where we basically understand the alternatives and just need to make a decision, or how many of these are issues where some further work is needed?
Well, first, I use the name issues because that's the word in GitHub. They're not actual issues like blocking or whatever. It's mostly discussions, or maybe we should do this way or that, which can also be done on the mailing list sometimes. Really, usually, it's things that still need discussion until we reach a consensus. I really can't tell which ones are close to be done and which ones are still up in the air.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So next, or unless you have questions, we can go to next slide. So what we're going to do from now, one of the tasks that's been worked on, it's on the conformance test files, because with the specifications, we need something to verify that the files are correct or not. So there's also a tool to verify that. It's not exactly a work for the Cellar work group, but that's something we work in parallel with the same people because it makes sense, especially since the original goal of these specifications were people working on archives. It's important for them to make sure what they're going to store for decades is actually correct and usable in a very long time. So they need to make sure everything is perfect. Then there's this proposal that's been discussed on the mailing list that I would like to do is to split the current specification in 3 documents. One with the Matroska elements, like the core specification of the formats, and 2 separates, one for the codec mapping. And as we discussed, in an ideal world, there will be a document for each codec, and each codec work group will define their own mapping in Matroska, but it's unlikely to happen. So we need to do that work at least for the major codecs. But on the other hand, it's a moving target, and it's also a lot of work. I would prefer that it's a separate document so we can, one is not blocking the other. And it's the same for tags. There's a lot of tags that you can have custom tags, and we have a list of official tags that's better for people to use. So tags are metadata. You can give the title to a movie or specify some camera stuff for a chapter in the movie, anything you can think of. So again, that's a lot of work, and I wouldn't want the main document for the specification to be blocked by some other issues that are less important. Well, it's important, but they're like different issues. There's one document can be done while the other is being worked on. And then there's still work on the wording and the cleaning of the specification to remove all the parts that come from the website that was informal or even shouldn't it be at all in the specification. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. More questions?
So just a question for the rest of the working group. Are people comfortable with these proposed subdivisions, or does anybody have any comments on that?
Jonathan Lennox, the structure you've described for the codec registrations feels a lot like the way we do RTP payload formats, which I think the IETF is pretty comfortable with. And basically, when RTP was originally written, they wrote one document, which was a separate document, but published simultaneously with the payload formats for a bunch of the existing things that people were using. And then as new payloads have been defined over the years, there have just been new things added. I mean, the one question I will have is, how is IANA going to take over the registration database for this? Is that the idea? Or is this still going to be under the control of some other Matryoshka-based organization? And then if it's IANA, what is the registration policy going to be? Specification required or something stricter?
We haven't talked about that yet, especially with IANA, but there's two things. There's the existing formats, especially it's not existing in terms of specifications, but in terms of people have files with these. So we need to document that. And then for new formats like FFV1 and in the future, then I think it's better, if it's done in a separate document and probably go through IANA other process to define it. And that's also the idea of Matryoshka. It's completely independent from what you store inside. There's the format and the rest of what's in the codec, and also the tags. The file can be used even if you know absolutely nothing about these. So that's why also it's important to have separate stuff. And so it would make sense that, yes, in the future, it's a different working group and done completely in a different way. And that's also part of what we need to put in the Matryoshka specifications is exactly what you need to do when you need to define a codec mapping or a tag. So yeah, I don't know exactly how it works with all the IANA stuff, but that's probably something we have to work on. That's one of the issues or tasks we have. So yeah, we're going to work on that, and probably towards with relying on separate process.
Yeah, so I think I can point you at a couple of documents that define IANA registries if you want some examples to work from.
Mm-hmm.
There's a, you're going to investigate doing this through IANA? No decision?
No. So I don't know if you could hear that, Steve. Mo's question was for the notes. We're going to investigate doing this through IANA.
Okay. So I don't know if there's more slides left. I don't remember. Yes,
Yep, there still are.
So I talked earlier about things that might be added to Matroska now or in the future. So there's document we already talked about XCBML, so we'll not talk about that anymore. There's a different kind of defining colors when they're stored in Matroska, especially for raw video. So it's called the lookup table. It seems to be something that's used in archiving, and so that's a way of defining things we don't have in Matroska, so we probably want to have it. Then there's work on the encryption. It's used in WebM, and they use the elements that were defined originally for that, but originally it was defined with not much knowledge on encryption. There's a lot of stuff that can probably removed. So that's more elements to deprecate. There's one task about something to add more language support. There's a way to tell this audio track or this video, but usually it's audio or subtitle track is in that language, but the way it's done is using the ISO something format that doesn't cover all languages. So we want to have one tag that's also cover all the languages defined in RFC 5646. So that's another thing we need to add. There's the new codec ID prefix. Basically, every codec right now, for example, an audio codec already has to start with A underscore, video V underscore, subtitle S underscore. We need to add more for all the track types that exist in Matroska. That's not a big deal, but needs to be done. And time code track, that's also something important for archiving people. They use time codes from various sources, and right now it's not handled at all in Matroska, so we need to define so probably some kind of codec mapping, and that would be a new codec, so it could be done via IANA or the IANA way of doing things. And we'll see if by adding all this stuff, we need to define a new Matroska version, or it can be just version 4 if it's version 5. So that's some of the things that need to be added, and there might be some more people want to add in the coming future. And that's the next slide. So if you ask a question.
All right, there is no one at the mic, so.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was a bit long anyway. I think we're over time already.
All right, thank you, Steve.
So the next presentation is just very briefly an overview of the work that was done on FLAC in June 2017. In June of this year, a number of people had been working on getting a draft of the FLAC documentation into the Cellar repository, or at any rate. So Andrew is going to just briefly tell us a little bit more about that. Andrew? Oh, there we go.
If you guys hear the audio.
Oh, there you go. You have the floor, Andrew.
Okay, cool. Sorry, it doesn't seem like it's transmitting video, but audio is working, so I'll just roll with that. Yes, as that introduction said, this will be short and sweet since the work on the making the standardization of FLAC, the free lossless audio codec, just began. So I guess we can go to the next slide. So the process started in May of 2017, and most of the work was done then in June. So this slide pretty much summarizes where the bulk of the work that has been done to date has been focused. And a majority of that really has just been to create a semantically identical translation of the existing specifications that are on the website right now, and to translate those into Markdown. The reason being for this, that the approach is being taken with this that is similar to the other standardization processes that were just discussed, where the Markdown is then used to generate XML and the HTML and text documents that become the RFC. So that is kind of getting that translated and making sure that it is semantically identical with no errors in the translation, and then adapting the makefile to be able to generate those derivatives is where most work has been done. Then some work has been done to correct some minor errors that were found during that translation process from the original document, such as typos. There were a few broken links or links that were pointing towards outdated sources that were then fixed or rerouted to a Internet Archive, like an archived copy of what those links were originally linking to. And yes, this is where most of the time has been spent. I guess we can move to the next slide. And then this is once that process of translation was done and it had been read over a few times and checked for any errors in that process, changes have started being made to the document itself. So some examples are, there has started to be some clarification of the encoding type to make it a little bit more specific than what is in the original specification as it exists now on the website. Some minor changes have been made to decrease ambiguity, such as showing calculations where some of the numbers used in the specification come from that are absent in the original specification, and then rewording to make it more conform with the RFC format in terms of wording and what the words mean with their specific meanings. There have been some changes that have come through FLACDev, the FLACDev list that have been incorporated as well. Those also kind of to date fall more into the category of decreasing ambiguity. So some of the discussions that have been on FLACDev, because there's been a little bit, we've been keeping so far the FLACDev list kind of appraised at the same level that the Cellar list is, and there's been some response there. And some of those have spurred some things that some of the FLAC developer people who have used it and thought had other suggestions for improving clarity have made those changes. So far, there has not been a ton of communication, but it does seem that there is kind of a good basis to start with. Right now, there are 5 issues open. And they are kind of all revolving around still the nitty-gritty of making sure that all the things work with the translation into the derivative files. There's some issues with internal links and anchors that are being worked on. And then the rest are also just kind of suggestions for clarity, such as the inclusion of the information that would be in the metadata block in FLAC, which is actually not contained in the specification that's on the FLAC website currently. It's linked out to the Vorbis comment specification. And so suggestions and issues on the GitHub right now about including those as a part of this specification. And in terms of work that's been done so far, that is basically it. So this is short and sweet. I think if we go to the next slide, it's just for questions, but hopefully this is a good chance to spur some comments or talk about this.
Well, so my question as chair is do you have everything that you need to complete this process, or is there other things you need from the working group?
I mean, myself personally, I like that comment earlier about being an academic, not a coder. I'm a librarian, not a coder, so I've been involved in the process with helping kind of steward the documents. I know that there's some of the people who are also have been involved in the process are participants in this meeting right now. So I don't know if they would be able to speak to that. I think that ultimately it would be good if there was more more communication out of kind of a, more of, right now there's not actually a person kind of spearheading the effort, and it would probably be helpful if there was more communication with the LAC development list. Right now, the work that is being done does exist not in an institutional repository, it just exists in a repository that's on my GitHub account, which seems like there would probably be a more authoritative place for the work to be being undertaken ultimately. Might be ideal. I don't know if there's anybody else has comments, but.
Yeah, I don't know how actually setting up a specific working group GitHub works, but I can certainly ask around and see if we can get something that looks more official.
That could be helpful.
Sorry.
No, you go.
This is one of the last milestones for the working group. I think it's December of 2017. So this is really just to give everyone in the room and attending remotely an idea of why that document is currently in our group's website and what's been going on with that.
Jonathan, my question, you at this point, from your description, it sounds like you don't anticipate needing to change the FLAC bit stream at all. You're just clarifying the specification, and you expect to maintain compatibility with files in the wild.
So far, the work that's been done has just been focused on that. I know that several months ago, when there was some discussion about work on the FLAC standardization on the Cellar listserv, some people who seem to have been had significant experience with using FLAC did seem to express some interest in working on the kind of more technical end of that. There hasn't been that much involvement in that sense yet, but I think it's theoretically possible that some of those people would be involved, or if the people involved in FLAC development got involved.
Okay.
Okay, are there any additional questions for Andrew? Unofficial. Okay, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
I think next on the agenda, I just kind of wanted to see if there needed to be any discussion about what the next steps were for the documents that are in the pipeline and coordinating future work. It seems to me that what needs to be done for most of the documents is finding more reviewers, perhaps actively seeking out specific individuals to do the reviews, and in addition to people who have been doing the work already in the working group. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or any outstanding questions regarding any of the presentations. I know we were going a little bit over our allotted agenda time, but we do have until 12 o'clock, I think, technically. 11:30.
So this has been just going back and looking at milestones from the, and I want to recap my understanding. I gather that FFV1, 1, 2, 3, the information, the documenting current stuff, and the EBML are both pretty close to ready in the author's opinions. Did I understand that correctly? Is that what the chairs understand?
Yeah, that was my understanding also.
Okay. And that Matryoshka has more work, and the flag stuff is kind of early. So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So,
Yep, I think that's accurate.
okay, good.
So that was FFV1, informative version 0123, EBML or almost
The line is just 0, 1, and 3.
Mostly that one have been in those slides.
Matryoshka, D5,
Yeah, okay. So if there aren't any additional questions about that, I knew Jimmy Jones is doing research in the area audiovisual codecs and sorry.
I'm sorry. Let's kind of close on the next steps first. I thought you had more to say maybe. So
Okay.
next steps are, if I understand it correctly, we're to solicit reviews on those two things that are almost done.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming nothing blows up in a small number of weeks of soliciting reviews, they'll go to working group last call.
I think that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the plan.
And then the working group probably over the next few weeks is going to concentrate on getting those things done, even though we know these other things need work, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think the FFV1 document for 0, 1, and 3, was ready for a working group last call. It's just I think could benefit from more review. And the same thing for EBML, and so I think perhaps that's yeah. I mean, I guess that's something that that we should actively, or I can, not to assign work to anybody else. I can try and pursue additional reviewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important question for EBML, at least, whether we decide to add XEBML, because that seems like something that would require a bit more work than could possibly be done in the next couple of weeks.
I would argue that if you do decide to do that, and make it a separate milestone. So don't block the EBML unless people really think they should. Otherwise, don't block EBML on XEBML. And I'm willing to hear arguments that it should block, but it's not obvious to me why it would.
All right. Any document authors have opinions on that, or?
Yeah, Steve Lum says, I agree.
Okay. The next president.
So if there aren't any additional questions, we'll just go into a presentation by Jimmy Jones, who, as he commented earlier, is an academic. So Jimmy, are you there? There. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Oh, hi,
yes,
everyone.
we can both
Okay,
hear and
let
see.
me change my view here so I can see the slides. You can still hear me and see me. Okay, great. So first off, thank you all for having me. I'll move through this kind of briskly because I don't know if there's any more business that y'all have to do. Thank you for having me. A special thank you to Tessa for putting me on the agenda and for answering various and sundry tech issues. So thank you. Should I just say next slide when it's time for them to be advanced? Okay, yeah, so please go to the next slide.
Yep, that'll be perfect.
So introduction to me, I know some of you a little bit from some of my past work. I am a doctoral student at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, our Library and Information Sciences department in the United States. I'm working on my doctoral dissertation, and I'm embarking on the research phase, finally, of the dissertation work. And one of the things that I want to do with this work is do a qualitative analyses of 2 examples of standards development and their implementation. So I'm currently embarking on the data gathering that's going to involve interviews with at least some of you, I hope, over the next year. Probably the earliest that would start will be in September. And then I plan to actually write the dissertation the following year with the hope that it will be deposited in 2 years. So we will see what actually plays out, but that's the plan. Next slide, please. So I worked on the Library of Congress's MXF JPEG 2000 standard for 3 years before I came here to be a doctoral student. What we were calling AS07 uses MXF and JPEG 2000, and it was and is being developed with considerable input from the American television broadcast community, mostly through the form of the AMWA, the Advanced Media Workflow Association. So the development and implementation of that standard is one of the 2 standards that I want to look at. Next slide, please. And then your standard, the one that we're talking about tonight and that you've been working on diligently over the past few years, the Cellar standard. And this is where you come in, where we talk about the Matroska and FFV1 and FLAC work. Next slide, please. So I have 2 research questions. One, and in no particular order. The first one is the question of how do the groups, the Cellar group, you guys, and the FAGI group, what are the influence and kind of power dynamics between the people in the groups as y'all do your work to create the standards, and how you are negotiating issues of and questions of what quality means and what sustainability means in the moving image preservation realm. Next slide. So following from that, some kinds of concepts that I'll be exploring in the interview phase is, how do these groups, how do the members within the groups negotiate their definitions of quality? Are the different ideas of quality different between people who come from a strict kind of engineering background and people who come from, say, an archives and library background? How do we all get on the same page? Do we start off on the same page? Do we have to, how do we communicate these ideas with each other? Is there any disparity to begin with? How do the groups assign leaders? How do people kind of rise up as leaders in the different kinds of work that you're doing? Or is it completely, loose confederacy and no one's really considered a leader? These are all questions that I want to tease out in terms of how the groups do their work to develop the standards. Next slide. And then the second kind of parallel research question is, I want to look at how these things are developed, but then I also want to look at how these standards are implemented in the preservation community's work. So next slide. So the concepts that I want to look at here with interviewing people is what kind of factors inform preservation professionals' decisions of which standards to use or not to use in their video digitization work? Infrastructure kinds of questions, staffing factors, cost, etc. In some cases, this might be kind of ethical decisions. My institution wants to consciously align ourselves with the open source community and not with any kind of industry community like Apple or something like that. It might not just be the kind of dollars and cents decisions. It might be more, ethical perspectives, or moral perspectives, however you want to say that. And do the standards that are being produced by these groups or similar standards, do they need to be adapted for local practice? at these different institutions, or do they work, right out of the box? How active are the users of the standards, which may not always be the same people as the designers of the standards? How active are they in helping these standards to change and mature over time? Next slide, please. So I would like to, in order to gather data, I know that you've probably seen my calls for participation on the AMIA listserv and on your Cellar listserv. I want to do interviews with standards developers and or implementers. Again, they may not all be the same populations. Likely, a lot of this stuff is going to play out over Skype, but I do plan to be at the EMEA conference in New Orleans later this year. I think it's in November. So we can do in-person interviews for those participants who are attending that conference and are able to do an in-person interview. Otherwise, Skype will probably work just fine. I'm also planning site visits, and I've been talking with people at these places. So far at Indiana University, who I know uses or is planning to use FFV1 encodings with Matroska, and I think they may also be working with AVI containers on the mass digitization that they're doing. They're actually digitizing thousands of hours of content, probably as we speak. And the folks at the Library of Congress's Culpeper facility south of Washington, D.C. So some of the people who have been very vocal in the development of the FADGI specification, that's the MXF JPEG 2000 specification, and also are implementing it for their use. So far, those are the two sites that I want to visit and talk with. I'm happy to hear ideas about more sites who might be using something very similar to what Cellar is doing or what FADGI has produced. But I also want to look at and do kind of a close read of the documentation surrounding the work. So the standards development documents and drafts like you have on the Cellar site, meeting minutes, best practice documents in the case of people who are implementing, listserv communications, all the places where people, meetings like this, in-person meetings, all the places where the people are synchronously or asynchronously working on doing the work with each other. Next slide, please. So in closing, just a few caveats. I am not intending this work to be a discussion of which standard is better or determination of which standard development group is better or does their work better. This is not coming from a kind of positivist perspective where I am determining which one wins or which one is better. Instead, I'm actually just trying to look at how the groups operate and how the standards are being developed, how people communicate with each other, again, how we negotiate what quality means, what sustainability means, what archivability means, these kinds of concepts. And then how the standards and why the standards are or are not implemented. And I know that the Cellar standard, of course, is being worked on as we speak, but if there are similar kinds of combinations of Matroska and FFV1 as in Indiana University's work, why would they choose that over the FADGI spec? Why would they choose that over just digitizing uncompressed with an AVI container, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is not for me to determine who's right, who's wrong, who's better, who's not. That's not the tenor of my work. My work is more to explore and kind of put a lens up a little bit to how we do what we do and why. Next slide, which I think might be the last slide. So if you would like to participate in my work, if we have not already talked with each other, please contact me. I'm looking forward to learning more about the work that you're doing and working with you on this research. I know I've already talked with several of you and you've already agreed graciously to be interview subjects. I'm happy to anonymize if that is something that you is important, that you not have your name on this work. I'm happy to work with you on that. And again, thank you for letting me observe the meeting. If you have any questions about the work, I'm here, happy to take them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jimmy. Okay. And if are there any additional questions for Jimmy or for any of the other presenters? I'm sensing that's a no. Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's a collective desire to kind of move on to the next
Great.
thing.
You can turn me off then if you need to. Thank you again.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, especially to the Jabber Scribe and our note taker. And I think, did everybody get a chance to sign the blue sheets? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much.
So then you need the pad, so you guys can just grab my pad.
I'm just happy he didn't crash my whole laptop.
Well, my understanding is that I filled in the form for remote presentations in IETF, so that if people were in IETF, they should have been able to do remote presentations. But perhaps there was some confusion.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea how that works.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, that's because I told her, he's like, yeah, we'll be able to do it remotely. I filled out the form.
yeah, there may be something that they're supposed to do in media code to put up slides, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, the mic is still on? Is it? Why didn't you use the microphone?